Greetings YouTube and welcome to the Blue Corner and to a Cardfight Vanguard deck profile on Vyrgilla, host new trial deck. After much delay, we finally have him. He's here, and yeah, he's pretty good. Like, if you've been paying attention to the tournament scene in Japan as well as to content creators, you know that this deck has had a fair amount of attention behind it because it's been doing very well, and I'm meta with Bob Saga and what have you, and yeah, there's reason for it. This deck's very strong. It's got removal, it's got toolboxing, it can build a board, it has multi-attack, it can multi-attack with high power, and it can play either going first or going second, and I almost want to say that it's better going second than going first because your best cards are locked behind your opponent being on grade 3. So as a result, you just have a very good aggro deck, and if you can catch your opponent unawares and maybe have a little luck on a trigger side, you probably smash your opponent before they get to their second grade 3 turn, which is the ideal game plan. I don't know if this deck has like a good long grindy game. It probably does, just because like your main grade 3 can bring back a guy every turn and you'll always have at least an attacker alongside your Vanguard, and on top of just having B standing options. So that being said, yeah, let's just get right into this. So for the Rideline, I'm just playing like this standard Vyrgilla Rideline. The grade 0 is like the only thing you really experiment with here, and since I literally built this thing and played at locals yesterday, I didn't really have much opportunity to swap this out. But I'll probably swap this out for like a Narukami starter. You guys know what the grade 1 does at this point. It's been featured in a lot of deck profiles for Dragon Empire. You don't have to discard to ride to grade 2, you just soul blocks instead. The grade 2, yeah, if you ride a grade 3 opponent, looks at the top 7 cards for a grade 2, but if you ride Vyrgilla on top of it, you look at the whole deck instead, which is phenomenal in a deck that plays a lot of good grade 2s, but also because your orders are grade 2s, and it doesn't restrict you to just normal units. You can search your blitz orders or your playmaker orders. Very nice. It's also effective if you have 4 more rear guards. You can reveal a Vyrgilla grade 3 from your ride deck, and it gets a crit for the turn, which, if you see the right combination of cards, can actually just like be devastating to your opponent, because they're dealing with like high-powered rear guard strings as well as a 2 crit Vanguard. So you're going to be like either hitting your opponent for a good amount of damage or eating up their hand. And then Vyrgilla, whose effects are Energy Blast 3, you can bind one of your opponent's rear guards and call a grade 2 from your drop zone, and then when he attacks, you can stand one of your grade 2 rear guards. So, good little bit of pressure. When he first came out in the West, which was, I think, DZBT2, as like a simple budget deck, it was alright, but obviously this effect on its own now is not enough for like a grade 3 Rideline boss monster. But it's a nice transitionary piece for your main grade 3, which is Vyrgilla rewrite form Alfknights, who I've also mistakenly called Alfknights and Alfheim, respectively. So his effect is, if your opponent's on a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, you can bind a rewrite the star Vyrgilla from your field to ride him down his stand, and then he performs the following effects. When placed, you can search your deck for a deck or drop for a Galaxian card and call it the rearguard circle, or you can search your deck or drop for an ultimate skill card and add it to your hand, which is very good because this means you can cut down a number of like non-grade 2 Galaxian cards that you're playing, such as this guy, and it also means you can cut down a number of the ultimate skill cards that the deck was previously playing. I think you were playing like 2, maybe even 3 copies of Stardust Blade before, but now you can just get away with playing 1, and that's it. And then his other effects is, when he attacks, you can counterblast 1 and stand all of your front row rear guards, and he gets +1 drive for the battle. However, also, I should say, for each copy of this guy in your soul, your front row gets 5k. So yeah, it's a front row rear guard restand with 3 drives that just gradually buffs your board the more of these you ride, and at the end of the turn, you ride this guy from your bind zone as rest. So this means that on the following turn, you can use this guy as effect to pop a guy, bring back a guy, and then ideally go into another Alfknight and see what I mean? I just mispronounced it again. And then you just repeat the process until they're dead. So that being said, still playing a couple copies of Vyrgilla for Persona riding purposes, as one of your ultimate skill cards does get a bonus if you Persona Road. And just being able to Persona Ride and then slam this guy down on top of that is just gross. Because then you're potentially swinging for like plus 15, plus 20. Not bad, not bad. So, yeah, there's your main grade 3s. For supporting grade 3s, 2 copies of Fanfare. If it's Soul Blast, it's 1 on place to give your Ezra Rearguard 5k and himself 5k until the end of the turn. But if your opponent's on grade 3, they get 10k instead. And then at the end of the battle, at the end of the turn, this guy's in your front row. If you've played an ultimate skill card this turn, you can put him into the soul to draw a card and countercharge. So it gives you resources, which is pretty cool. And speaking of Ezra, let's just get right to it. So 4 copies of your main grade 2 Ezra. It's functionally this deck's Blaster Blade, as you need to see it as often as you can and just keep cycling it, as he's a 15k grade 2 with a 15k shield. So he big. However, you can only play it if you have a Vyrgilla Vanguard, so you can't just splash into other stuff, but that's fine. And yeah, being a 15k intercept is really nice. It gives you functionally more defensive triggers, so that if you're like me and can't hit triggers for shit when it matters, you can at least intercept with 15 shields or guard with them. And then you can have Vyrgilla bring it back and pop a guy at the same time. So this is your main guy, and you just basically apply effects on it with your other cards, like this guy. As if your opponent's on grade 3 and you call this guy down alongside this is now a 25 attacker, this is a 23 attacker. But even if your opponent's on grade 2, then this is going to be a 20 attacker, and this is an 18 attacker, which are still very relevant numbers. So that's your main grade 2, and then for secondary grade 2s, 1 copy of the Ace unit, because you only play 1, and 1 of the Energy Cycler. Your energy usage in this deck is pretty high, because you're always using 3 for Vyrgilla, and then you have like the occasional extra bit of energy. So therefore, if you're going to play any other grade 2s that use energy, I really would not recommend more than 1. So there is this guy, but if you can't get a hold of the Energy Cycler, you can also play the grade 2 that comes in the trial deck, N-Wing. When she's on place, you can Energy Blast 3, pop whenever, bind one of your opponent's rear guards, and then she gains 5k whenever your Ezra attacks. So this attacks twice in a turn, give or take, so she'll get plus 10. And then if you have a grade 3 or greater Vyrgilla Vanguard, she gets 10k shield. So it's not a bad option in place of this if you can't get a hold of it. But since this is a piece reliant deck, having extra draw power is obviously very nice. And speaking of consistency pieces, 4 copies of the grade 3 Searcher that came out in DZ8. So on place, count plus 1, look at top 7 for a grade 3 card and add it to your hand. If you whiff, you countercharge. And then during your turn, if any unit's rearguard got bound for the turn, then she gets plus 5,000. So it's a 13 booster in a deck that has bind as removal. Very, very nice. Then 4 copies of Shenri. The starter deck does give you 1, which is nice, but unfortunately, you really do want the full playset. If you can't get a hold of other copies of Shenri, she did get reprinted before in the whatchamacallit, that set with the Grandpa card. So she's a little easier to get. You can play just like more Dragon Empire generics in the slot instead, or maybe even more grade 2s. I found that I never really needed more 2s, as between Vyrgilla bringing back Ezra every turn and like having like this guy, it was never really an issue. But you could just play more copies of this guy instead if you can't get a hold of more Shenris, or this too. If you had to like drop money on a money card in this deck, it definitely needs to be this guy, because this is how you're able to like push and close your games out. The other cards are just means of getting you to him. But yeah, Shenri builds soul and draws cards, and that's really important. 3 copies of the Cosmog. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. If you call Ezra, you can count plus 1 to call it to the same column as it, but if you called it by the effect of Vyrgilla, you don't count lost. And then when your Ezra in the same column as him stands, it stands as well. So it's just a restanding booster for your main attacker. And good discard fodder. 1 copy of the Dragon Empire No G Zone generic that we got back in what set was this? Was it set 6? DZ BT5. So these cards, you can activate them by discarding them if your opponent has no G-Zone, and you put 2 cards from your Rideline that are in your soul and your drop zone to your ride deck face up. And then you look at the top 5 cards of your... No, it's top 7 cards? Yeah, you look at the top 7 cards of your deck for a grade 3 with a different name in your Vanguard and add it to your hand. If you whiff, you put it back in your hand. And then it has an effect that lets it get 5k shield. In this case, if your opponent has 4 more rear guards in their drop zone, and then if your opponent's has a G-Zone card face up, you can bind a grade 3 or greater card from the drop zone to give it 10k shields. Every nation got one of these in the set. This one just requires, and the first effect is the same for all of them. The shield effect will come up every now and then, but not as frequently as if you were, say, on Yandiva. But it's another card that helps you search Alfknights, Alfknights. See, I keep getting that name wrong. Then rounding out the normal units, we got the Twin Buckler Dragons at 4 copies. You're playing multiple Blitz orders in this deck, so you don't want to run into the risk of having Sanctitude and one of these guys and only being able to play one. You want to be able to play a PG and a Blitz order, ideally so. That's what we're doing with this. It's the same thing I'm doing with Zorga right now. And speaking of Blitz orders, let's just get into it. So you've got Defensing Roar. You're only allowed 1, so you play 1. And 1 Union in the Sky, which got reprinted in this. In the Asterion deck, there's also Twin Cast, which is also a 2, so you could play it in here if you want to play Twin Cast instead. I think it just depends on a given format. Then for your skill cards, we'll go over these ones. So there's Stardust Blade and the newly released Blazing Star Cross. So Stardust Blade, if you have a Vyrgilla Vanguard, Soul Blast's 1 to look at top 5 for a card with equal grade or less than your Vanguard, and you call it. Your Vanguard then gets the skill of when your rigger gets retired by your opponent, you can call a normal unit from the deck. And also a continuous for your turn, your Vanguard gets 3k for every one of your normal units on the board and in the drop. So it makes your Vyrgilla Vanguard really big. I don't like this one as much because it costs Counterblast, and your Counterblast usage is a bit limited. You don't, aside from your grade 3, you don't have countercharges in here, and I never bothered to get what's the order card? The sword that goes in the soul to either draw or countercharge. You know what I'm talking about. I probably really should, but I just keep thinking, nah, I don't play this game enough to warrant purchasing that or Forbidal. And then this card, you play it with Soul Blast 1 if you have a Vyrgilla in your card Vanguard. You choose one of your Ezreals, and it gets 10k until the end of turn. But if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, it also gets the skill of when it's stood by your Vanguard with Vyrgilla, and if you either Persona Road or your opponent has 3 or more cards in their bind zone, that restood Ezreal gets a crit on top of that. It's a nice card to help push, and it just builds upon the fact that this deck has really good going second lines, because you just go into your new grade 3, get your front row restand, your front row rear guard restand. Now one of them is going to be with a 10k and a crit on top of another potential 10k and a crit if you called the 10k and a crit, another 10k on top of that if you called the other grade 3 down. Like that Ezreal is going to get really big really fast, and it's going to have a booster, and like it hits really good numbers because it's a 15k attacker. So just putting your 8k behind it means it's swinging for 23 at minimum. Then for the triggers, obviously we play crits because we want to just smash our opponent as fast as possible. Then you've got your 4 heals, and then I was initially playing fronts because I figured, oh, front row restand, or rear guard restand I should say, front trigger should be good at that, and fronts are good, but I can see now why draws have been played in a lot of lists, because again, your piece oriented deck, you want to see your main grade 3 attacker. So having extra means of getting to that card, very nice. And then Drag Veda. Don't really need to explain why this card is in here. It's stupid good, and someday I think they'll just straight up axe it. So yeah, that's the Vyrgilla deck in a nutshell. All in all, I like how it plays. It's definitely up my alley, and it will be something that I will definitely be playing in the coming month or so of weeks. I'm going to be able to hit a couple more locals in the course of the next month and a half, so I'll be able to get some more games in with this. That being said, I do also want to start getting some games in with Vermilion, because DZ-Set9 gave it a nice support card indirectly that helps it also just maintain hand and soul, which was definitely an issue with the deck before. And technically speaking, Vermilion's not a bad deck to play in the current format, just because now that the ban list has come and gone, Bob Sakura only has one Varlord to work with, and if you can hit that with Vermilion's Punch and Bind combo, that hurts. But anyways, that's all I got for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, this is Bluestar899, checking out.